passenger boards his flight, holding a valid first-class ticket. Minutes later, a flight attendant asks him to move to the back. No explanation, just cold stares. Bod was 58 years old, a black man whose life had been a long climb through storms of doubt and quiet battles. He carried himself with the easy posture of someone who had earned his success, not inherited it. That morning he boarded the plane in a tailored but modest suit, carrying a worn leather briefcase. The world saw an ordinary traveler. They did not see the man who controlled a deal worth $50 million, the kind of decision that could shift companies and change lives. As he stepped into the first-class cabin, the air shifted. A white man in his 40s, polished shoes and diamond-decked cufflinks, stared at Bod as if he had wandered into the wrong neighborhood. The flight attendant followed his lead, a polite smile thinning. Bod took his seat in 1 Ampere, calm and quiet, but he could feel the weight of judgment pressing in from every angle. Then came the words, soft and cutting. "Sir, could you move to another seat? We'd like to accommodate this gentleman's request." There was no reason, no apology, only the assumption that he did not belong. Bod said nothing. He stood, collected his bag, and walked the long aisle toward the back of the plane. Every step felt like a spotlight on his skin, his silence, his history. He sat by the engine hum, unoffered a drink, ignored like a shadow. But his eyes were open, memorizing every face, every slight. He was not humiliated, he was taking note. The next morning, the glass boardroom gleamed under the New York Sunday. Bod sat at the head of the table, posture straight, gaze steady, the door open, and in walked the same man from the plane, the one who had claimed his seat as if status were birthright. For a heartbeat, the man froze, recognition slicing through his confidence. He stammered out a greeting, his voice faltering. Bod did not smile. He listened to the pitch, watched the man sweat, and waited until the room was silent. Then, in a voice soft but immovable, he spoke of the previous day, of the quiet insults, the dismissive service, the unspoken message that he was less. The man stumbled into apologies, begging for a chance, promising that the contract would save his career and family. Bod's eyes never wavered. He closed the folder in front of him and said, "The deal is off." No anger, no raised voice, just the clean finality of a man who had seen enough. By the end of the week, the company lost the contract, and the man who had judged him on sight was fired. Bod walked away carrying nothing but the same briefcase, his dignity untouched, his power undeniable. True strength doesn't need to shout. It waits, it endures, and when the moment comes, it speaks with the weight of truth. Bod had walked onto the plane with quiet confidence, carrying the same worn leather bag he had taken through every airport in his career. In Idea 1, he had entered the terminal unnoticed, a man who seemed ordinary in his modest dark suit, while in reality he was traveling to close a $50 million deal. Now, in the soft hum of the first-class cabin, his test truly began. He eased into seat 1 Ampere, the window framing the early sunlight over the tarmac. He placed his bag beneath the seat in front of him, fingers brushing the handle once before resting in his lap. Around him, the other passengers exuded the casual entitlement of people who expected the world to bend around them. Newspapers rustled, phones glowed, and low conversations buzzed like static. Then the air shifted. A man appeared, white, early 40s, with a face chiseled by self-assurance and the gleam of wealth in his cufflinks. His eyes narrowed at Bod, scanning him from shoes to collar, and a smirk flickered. "Excuse me," he said, his tone carrying an edge as cold as the cabin's recycled air. "I think you're in my seat." Bod raised his boarding pass, calm, silent. He had nothing to prove, but the flight attendant materialized at that very moment, her smile frozen and polite in a way that felt rehearsed. She didn't even check the white man's ticket. Instead, she leaned closer to Bod, voice sweet but firm. "Sir, would you mind moving to another seat? We'd like to accommodate this gentleman's request." No explanation, no apology, just the soft brutality of assumption. For a heartbeat, Bod stayed still. The hum of the plane, the faint clink of a champagne glass in the front row, the whisper of a zipper from a nearby bag, he absorbed it all, and with it, the unspoken message. They saw a black man in a quiet suit and assumed he didn't belong. He stood without a word, lifted his leather bag, and walked the long aisle to the back of the plane. Each step was a drumbeat, steady and echoing in his chest. He felt the weight of eyes pretending not to look, the the hush of whispers just beyond the roar of the engines. In the last row, next to the rattling wall and the faint smell of bleach, he sat down. His hands rested on his knees, still as stone, his breathing even. Around him, the choreography of exclusion unfolded. Bottled water skipped his row. Hot towels floated past him into other hands. Menus were handed to the passengers ahead, while he was left with the emptiness of the tray table. He watched, silent, memorizing every detail. His stillness was not surrender, it was steel. The flight climbed into the clouds, and the cabin settled into its rhythm. Bod closed his eyes for a moment, not to sleep, but to remember. The low rumble of the engines became the echo of boardrooms where he had been doubted. The hiss of whispers became the noise of streets where he had been ignored. This was not new, and yet it was always the same cut, the same weight pressing against the ribs. Halfway through the flight, turbulence jolted the cabin. A brief shiver ran through the rows, gasps and murmurs rippling like a wave. Bod sat steady, his hands folded, his face calm. He had weathered storms far worse than this, storms where his dignity had been the only light vest. He glanced at the white man in 1 Ampere, sipping champagne as if the world belonged to him, unaware that in a day's time the axis would tilt. The flight attendants passed again. He caught the subtle pause of hesitation as one met his eyes for the first time, then quickly looked away. The lesson was the same as it had been all his life. People reveal themselves in the smallest acts, in the moments when they believe no one is watching who matters. Hours later, the plane descended toward New York. The skyline rose from the horizon, glass catching the sun, and Bod felt the quiet click of resolve settle into his chest. The wheels touched the ground with a jolt, but inside he was as still as stone. He rose, collected his bag, and waited while the first-class passengers filed out ahead of him, pretending he wasn't there. The white man left without a glance. The flight attendant said, "Thank you for flying with us," her tone soft, as if to erase the 3 hours of calculated invisibility. Bod nodded once and stepped into the jet bridge, the cool air of the terminal washing over him like a reset. He carried no anger, only memory. He had been tested, and the test was over. Every look, every word, every choice to ignore him had been logged silently, and tomorrow, in the glass boardroom that waited just beyond this city, he would answer in the only language true power understands. The real turbulence, he thought, hadn't happened in the sky. It was coming for the ground. The next morning, the boardroom shimmered with glass and steel, perched above the city like a throne room of power. Bod entered quietly, the same worn leather bag at his side, his suit pressed but modest. He took a seat at the head of the table, calm as stone. The memory of the flight of the aisle, the whispers, the cold request to move was clear in his mind, but he showed nothing. The door opened. Footsteps echoed. The white man from the flight walked in, confident, still wrapped in the armor of arrogance. He didn't recognize Bod. Not yet. He glanced at him the way he had on the plane, that small, sharp smirk curling his lips. "Oh," he said casually, setting his briefcase down. "Didn't expect to see you in this room. Here to assist, or maybe aid support." He laughed under his breath, shaking his head, then turned to the other executives. "I swear, first class yesterday was full of surprises." His eyes flicked back to Bod with the same condescension he had carried in the aisle. Bod said nothing. He simply folded his hands, his expression unreadable. The man started his presentation, moving to the large screen, his voice booming with self-assurance. He spoke about revenue projections, market growth, the incredible potential of a $50 million partnership. He gestured toward Bod once or twice, as if to dismiss him from relevance, never realizing that every second pushed him closer to the edge of a cliff he couldn't see. Then, 5 minutes later, the room shifted. The lead executive from Bod's team said, "Before we move forward, I'd like to introduce the man you'll be working with directly, our primary decision-maker, Mr. Bod, our company president." The white man froze mid a gesture. His arm hung in the air, slowly lowering. His face drained to chalk as his eyes snapped to Bod, really seeing him for the first time. The smirk evaporated. Silence fell so heavy it seemed to press the air out of the room. Bod leaned forward, his voice calm but edged with steel. "I remember you," he said. "First class. Row 1 Ampere. The aisle. The way you looked at me. The way you decided I didn't belong." The man stumbled, his voice cracking. I I didn't mean it was a mistake. Please. Bod closed the folder in front of him with a soft, final click that sounded like a gavel. I do not sign contracts with men who cannot see the value of another human being when there's no spotlight on them. The boardroom was silent, the city skyline glinting behind glass like an audience to the fall. The white man's lips trembled as he tried to recover, but there was no escape from the truth. In 5 minutes he had gone from smug superiority to the edge of ruin. Bod rose, lifting his leather bag, and paused just long enough to let his words settle. Some mistakes, he said quietly, you don't get to fix. Then he walked out, leaving the room heavy with shock and the weight of consequence. By the end of the week, the contract was gone, the deal dead, and the man in the navy suit was escorted from his company, his arrogance shattered, his name now a cautionary tale. Bod's silence, once dismissed, had become unforgettable. The boardroom fell silent, thick with the weight of unspoken judgment. The white man stood frozen in place, his confident posture gone, his face pale under the bright, sterile lights. His hands trembled slightly as he clutched his folder, now meaningless in the air that had shifted completely against him. Moments ago, he had been sure of his world, sure of his place, sure of his superiority. Now, he stood on the edge of a collapse he had never seen coming. Please, he said finally, his voice breaking. Mr. Bod, I didn't mean it. I was foolish. I wasn't thinking. Please, give me one more chance. Bod remained seated, his back straight, his gaze calm but impenetrable. He let the words hang in the air, heavy with desperation. The city skyline shimmered behind him through the floor-to-ceiling glass, as if the whole of New York were a silent witness. In his mind, he could still see the plane's narrow aisle, still feel the eyes that had burned into his back when he was told to move, still remember the emptiness of being treated like he didn't exist. And now, here was that same man pleading, his arrogance stripped away, naked and small. Please, the man said again, stepping closer, his voice cracking with panic. This deal, it's everything. My company needs it. My family needs it. If I lose this, I lose everything. It was a mistake. I was wrong. His words stumbled into silence, his breath hitching as the reality of his own undoing gripped him. Bod finally leaned forward, his voice calm but carrying the weight of a final verdict. A man shows who he is when he believes no one is watching. You showed me everything I needed to see. His tone was measured, quiet, but it hit like a hammer against the man's fragile defense. The white man's knees nearly buckled. He set the folder down and clasped his hands as if in prayer, his voice trembling. I'll change. I swear I'll change. Please, give me a chance to make it right. Bod's eyes held steady, reflecting a lifetime of battles fought with silence, dignity, and patience. He thought of every door that had closed in his face, every moment someone like this man had decided he did not belong. Now, the roles had reversed, and the quiet power he carried was absolute. I do not sign contracts, Bod said softly, with men who cannot see the value of another human being until it serves their own interest. The words landed like a sentence. Around the room no one moved. The executives stared, some with awe, some with the cold understanding that the man's career had just ended in real time. The white man's lips trembled. Tears threatened, but he swallowed them back, choking on his own regret. He knew he was watching not just a deal vanish, but the life he had built crumble because of a moment of arrogance. Bod rose from his chair. Lifting his worn leather bag with deliberate calm, he paused at the doorway, his voice even and final. Some mistakes, he said, cannot be erased. Some lessons cost everything. Then he left, the glass door closing with a soft whisper that felt like the slam of a gavel. The room stayed silent long after his footsteps faded. The man stood there, frozen in place, the weight of failure crushing down. By the end of the week, the fallout came swiftly, calls from the board, canceled contracts, whispers turning to shouts. He was removed from his position, the company distancing itself from his disgrace. In the quiet of his empty home, he replayed that moment on the plane, the smirk he'd worn, the words he'd spoken without thought. Regret came too late, curling around him like smoke. His arrogance had cost him his career, his reputation, and the future he thought was certain. Bod, meanwhile, walked through the city streets with the same quiet composure he had carried all his life. He felt no need for celebration, no thrill in victory. The true power had always been in his patience, his dignity, his refusal to let anger speak louder than justice. The man who had tried to make him invisible had been forced to see him, and that vision would haunt him forever. True power does not beg to be seen. It waits, it endures, and when the time is right, it speaks once, and the world listens. The house was silent, and in that silence he finally heard himself. The white man pushed the door closed behind him, the echo of the latch louder than it had ever been. His briefcase slipped from his hand, landing on the hardwood with a hollow thud that seemed to reverberate through the empty rooms. He loosened his tie with trembling fingers, but it didn't release the weight around his chest. The suit he had once worn like armor now felt like a costume, a heavy reminder of a life that was no longer his. He sank into the couch, staring at the floor, unable to move. The day had stripped him bare. The phone call still echoed in his memory. The board's cold voices, the words, terminated, loss of confidence, irresponsible behavior, the $50 million contract gone, the company's reputation damaged, his career ended, and all because of him. He closed his eyes, but it only made the images sharper. The plane, the narrow aisle, the black man in the modest suit, sitting in 1 ampere, calm and silent, his own smirk, the careless, cutting words, the arrogant assumption that this man didn't belong. He could still hear himself laughing to the flight attendant, could still feel the satisfaction of taking what he thought was his. Then the boardroom, the moment his eyes met Bod's, and the ground shifted beneath him. The cold flood of recognition, the slow, unbearable realization that the man he had dismissed as invisible held the pen that could decide his future. And the worst part wasn't even the deal falling apart, it was the look in Bod's eyes, calm, steady, a mirror he couldn't escape. He had begged. He had said words he had never imagined saying to another man. Please, my family, my career, just one chance. He had tried to gather the shattered pieces of his dignity with shaking hands, but Bod had seen him for who he truly was. And Bod's voice, quiet and steady, had cut through him like truth always does. A man shows who he is when he thinks no one is watching. Now, in the dim living room, those words clung to him like a shadow. He picked up the letter from the board, formal, cold, final. Terminated for conduct unbecoming, for damaging the company's interests, for a breach of the trust that leadership demands. He had lost not only his position but also the respect of his colleagues, his friends, and perhaps even his family. His phone buzzed with messages, but none were from those who mattered. The world had already moved on, leaving him behind with the wreckage of himself. His thoughts drifted back to that plane, to the seat he had stolen and the silent man he had scorned. He remembered how Bod had stood, wordless, and walked to the back of the plane. He had felt triumphant then, certain of his place in the world, but now he understood that walk down the aisle had not been submission. It had been judgment, quiet and patient, waiting for its moment. Regret burned in him like acid. He wanted to turn back time, to say the things he had never said. I see you, I respect you, I am sorry. But the world doesn't offer second chances for the lessons you refuse to learn. He had built his life on arrogance and indifference, and the price had finally come due. The house remained silent, but it wasn't peaceful. It was the silence of absence of colleagues, of friends, of the respect he had once taken for granted. For the first time, he truly felt the isolation he had inflicted on others, the coldness of a world where he had never bothered to see the people around him. He thought of Bod walking out of that boardroom with quiet dignity, and felt the weight of his own emptiness. He had lost more than a contract, more than a career. He had lost the person he could have been if he had chosen humility over pride, kindness over contempt. And in that quiet house, with the night pressing in, he finally understood the cruel truth. Some lessons come too late, and some mistakes cost everything. ChatGPT Dernoi. Every story leaves a shadow, and this one leaves a lesson carved deep into the heart. It is a reminder that life has a way of revealing who we truly are when we think no one is watching. Success is not only built on talent, ambition, or wealth, it is held together by character. Arrogance and pride can build a tower, but a single moment of carelessness, a single act of disrespect can bring that tower crashing down. In this story, a man who believed he owned the world discovered that the world can be brutally honest. His smirk on the plane, his mocking words, and his careless dismissal of another human being seemed small in the moment. But small actions are powerful mirrors of who we are. By looking down on someone he thought unimportant, he showed the truth of his character, and life answered with silence, finality, and a price he could never have imagined: the loss of his career, his reputation, and the respect he thought was his birthright. The lesson is clear. True success does not come from stepping on others or believing you are above them. It comes from humility, from treating every person with dignity, no matter what they look like, what they wear, or where they sit. Every human being carries their own quiet strength, their own genius, their own story. To dismiss that is to blind yourself to the truth, and blindness leads to downfall. In a world that often rewards loudness and ego, this story reminds us that real power is often silent. Real success is built on kindness and respect. A smile given, a moment of patience, an act of simple decency. These are the foundations of a life that does not crumble under the weight of its own arrogance. For anyone chasing dreams, remember this: humility is not weakness. It is strength disguised as grace. Arrogance is not strength. It is a mask that will eventually break. If you treat others as invisible, one day the world may return that same silence to you. If you want to rise, lift others with you. If you want to build a legacy, start with character, because talent and status can vanish, but the way you touch people's lives will remain. So, take this as a call to action. In your workplace, in your daily life, and in the quiet moments when no one is watching, choose respect. Choose humility. Choose to see the humanity in every person you meet. This is the path to lasting success, and the shield against the silent judgment of the world. If this story touched you, leave us a thoughtful comment below. Share your own reflections, your own lessons, or the moments that made you rethink what success means. And if you want to keep learning from powerful, true-to-life stories like this, subscribe to our channel and follow our next videos. Each one carries lessons you can carry into your own journey. Thank you for listening to our story. We hope it stays with you the next time you meet someone who seems ordinary, the next time you are tempted to judge or dismiss, the next time you choose between arrogance and kindness. Success is not about who sits in first class. It is about who carries themselves with dignity in every seat. We wish you a day full of clarity, gratitude, and all the good things life can offer.